All right, so for this game, looks like we have what is effectively just a grouping game. We have a bunch of these countries, I, N, and S, and there's going to be all these artifacts that are going to be assigned to some or all of these countries. Now, the artifacts themselves, we have V, W, X, Y, Z, and it's worth noting this is a one-to-many game. Every one of those artifacts is only going to show up once, which is good. Now, in terms of spacing, it's actually worth noting that there's no minimums given to us. So arguably, some of these countries could be entirely empty as of right now. We could arguably put all 5 of these guys into Iceland, and that would still be entirely consistent. So I guess that's just something to keep in mind. But otherwise, let's take a look at the rules. So the first rule tells us that W and Y will have to go to the same country. So wherever they go together. Next, X has to go into either Norway or Sweden, which really, to be honest, is just another way of saying that X cannot go into Iceland. He'll have to go into those other 2. Next, more artifacts from Iceland than Norway, so I has to have more things than N, which as of right now really only tells us that I has to have at least 1. But in terms of kind of the ranges, I suppose Norway, we could maybe even do as many as 2 in here, as long as this guy gets 3 and then Sweden gets nothing. But that could work, right? That wouldn't stop anything from happening. I suppose we would want X to be among the Norways, because X can't go into Iceland. But yeah, maybe you can do something like X and V go here, and then everybody else, W, Y, Z, can go into Iceland. I think that would be fine. So yeah, even that, we have quite a bit of flexibility in terms of what we can do. Next, lastly, if V originated in Iceland, then Z goes to Sweden. So if we have V Iceland, then we have to have Z Sweden contraposed. If we don't have Z Sweden, then we cannot have V in Iceland. Now, of course, this rule only applies if we happen to have a V in here. But if we have a V elsewhere, like in Norway or Sweden, this rule doesn't do anything for us, and then Z could do whatever. So yeah, this feels pretty flexible, to be honest. So let's just go with what we have. The questions themselves. So the first question is a standard exclusion question, so we go by the rules. First rule, W and Y have to be together, so A already violates that. We can get rid of that. B, C, D, and E all have W and Y, so we're good. Next, X has to go to Norway or Sweden, so let's see. Answer choice B has X in Sweden, C, Sweden, D, Sweden, E, X is in Iceland, which is not cool. We can get rid of E. Next, Iceland has to have more than Sweden. So, or rather more than Norway. Answer choice B, that works. C, it doesn't. They both have 2 and that doesn't work. D, we're good. There's 3 and 1. Lastly, if V goes to Iceland, so let's look for cases of that between B and D. So D has V in Iceland, but then Z is supposed to go to Sweden, which it doesn't. So we can get rid of answer choice D, and that leaves us with answer choice B as the correct answer for question number 13. And as usual, we can plug that into the board. Answer choice B says W, Y in Iceland, and everything else goes to Sweden, V, X, Z. And there's nothing here. So next, the local question. So number 14 says, if Y and Z originated in Iceland, well, if we have a Y and a Z here, I suppose right away that's W is going to be there as well. So we have all 3 of these guys. And from there, I mean, we know that X has to go into one of these 2 positions. Oh, and so if Z is not in Sweden, which it's not, then V cannot go to Iceland. So V also looks like we'll have to go into one of these 2. But otherwise, there's no real restrictions on these guys, right? We've taken care of the spacing. That's going to happen no matter what. So really, V and X, they really could just go into either. Yeah, we can just say that these guys are going to go into either Norway or Sweden in any combination, really. So the question itself asks, what is the minimum number of artifacts that originated in Sweden? And I mean, we could put both of these guys into Norway quite easily. So Sweden doesn't have to have anything, really. So the minimum would be 0. The best answer to question number 14 is A. Next, number 15 is global. We'll come back to this one. Number 16 says, if W and X are both in Sweden, well, let's play it out. If we have W and X in Sweden. Again, we're going to have to pick up Y on the way as well. Oh, except wait a minute. We've just burned 3 of 5, and I is still supposed to have more than Norway. So Norway can't really have anything, because if you put even 1 in here, then this guy will have to have 2, and that's already pushing us past 5 total. So this is going to have to be an empty. So now we're just left with, what are we left with? We have V and Z, at least one of which is going to go to Iceland. Well, actually, it's just going to be 1, isn't it? Because if you put a V over here, then Z gets shoved over there. But likewise, if you put a Z over here, you can't put a V here as well, because that would break the same rule, because then you would have to have Z elsewhere. So if Z is here, then you'll have to have V over there. So really what you'll end up with is a VZ split. You'll have 1 here and 1 there. So the question now asks, which of the following must be true? A, nothing in Norway, and yeah, there it is. We have to have nothing from Norway. Best answer to question 16 is A. Next, so we have no more locals. Let's go back to the globals. Question number 15. Which of the following cannot be true? I guess let's see what we can do. A, V and X both from Norway. Could we have V and X from Norway? Actually, we've seen that. So this right here, we said we could have had them both in Norway, so that easily could have happened. Answer choice B, V and Y both in Iceland. Could we do that? Now this we haven't seen before, but why not? Like if we had W, Y, and V in Iceland, I mean, that would push the Z into Sweden, but that's fine, and X can go somewhere along there as well. I don't see the issue. That easily seems like it could have worked. Answer choice C, W and Z both in Iceland. This we've seen right there. We know that they could have both gone to Iceland. Answer choice D, W and Z both in Sweden. And conveniently also, we've seen W and Z could have both gone to Sweden. Answer choice E, W and Y both in Norway. Could we have the block in Norway? And I suppose why not? Because if you put a W here and a Y, oh yeah. So if we have W and Y, that will be 2 people in Norway. Then we'll have to have 3 in Iceland, because we always have to have more in Iceland. But if it's W, Y in Norway, it's just everybody else who's going to get pushed into Iceland. But then that would force V and Z to both go into Iceland, and they can't, because if V is there, then Z gets pushed into Sweden. So that would break. You cannot have W and Y both in Norway. Best answer to question 15 is E. Next, question number 17. Exactly how many of the artifacts are there? Any one of which could have come from Norway. So what could have come from Norway? I don't think do we really have any kind of restrictions on Norway? We know that V and X, we've seen them been able to go to Norway, right? Oh, what we just actually said. So W and Y couldn't go to Norway. So we can say right away, W is out, Y is out. From this scenario, we know that V and X could have both come from Norway. So the only real question is Z. Could we have Z come from Norway? And arguably, why not? Because I mean, in this scenario right here, couldn't the Z have gone into here, and then the V and X could have gone into Sweden just as easily? And that wouldn't break any rules. Everything would remain consistent. The V wouldn't trigger, and you would have more in Iceland than you do Norway. So it does look like the Z could also go into Norway. So the best answer is C. There are 3 elements that could have gone to Norway. Next, question number 18. Which of the following cannot be true? I guess let's take a look. Answer choice A, only V goes to Sweden. Now, in this scenario, this could have gone either way, right? You could have had V here alone and X could go into Norway, and that would have been fine. So that easily could happen. Next, only V and Z go to Sweden. Could we have just V and Z in Sweden? And maybe, I mean, in this scenario, Norway happened to be empty, but why couldn't you move the X into Norway? That wouldn't break anything. Iceland would still have more, and then this rule wouldn't really trigger. So I don't see why not. Easily seems like it could happen. Answer choice C, only W and Y go to Sweden. Could we have just W and Y in Sweden? And maybe we haven't seen that yet, but if we put W and Y here, then I mean, we could, for example, have V in here, and we could put Z in there, as long as Norway doesn't get, oh no, wait, that's just W and Y. Let's take that back. If we put only W and Y in Sweden, then we cannot trigger V in Iceland because that would have forced Z to go into Sweden. So V would have had to go into Norway. And then, oh, but that's a problem. That's going to break. Here, check this out. Let's run this. If we put W and Y into Sweden and only W and Y, there's nothing else there, which means we can't trigger V Iceland because then we would have had to have Z Sweden. That's not going to work. So V is going to have to go into Norway. But if there's something here, then we're going to have two people in Iceland, but that would have to include now X and Z. They're the only ones left, but X can never go into Iceland, which means that would break. That cannot be true. We cannot just have W and Y in Sweden. The best answer to question number 18 is C. Just in case, though, let's take a look at the rest, and let's just get rid of this. Answer choice D, only X and Z go to Sweden. Could we have just X and Z in Sweden? And maybe in this scenario, we could have pushed the V into Norway, and that would have been okay, right? That doesn't break anything. The V doesn't trigger, and Iceland still has more, so that would have been fine. Answer choice E, can we have only VWXY in Sweden? And yeah, this one we actually have seen explicitly. In this scenario, we could have had V, W, X, and Y all in Sweden. So once again, the only one that cannot be true is answer choice C.